Good afternoon. My name is Gab Davis. This is our first session on Path to a Perfect 10, how to prepare for the upgrade coming later this year to Domino, same time, iNotes Traveller, Verse on Premises version 10. So as I said, my name is Gab Davis. I'm an administrator, mostly of difficult, highly technical things, which is what I enjoy doing. An IBM Lifetime Champion for Social Business, and I've been working with IBM technologies like Domino since the early 90s. So let's get started. What we're going to cover in these Perfect 10, I'm doing under 4 sections. So we're starting with, are we ready? Establishing whether the environment is ready for us to upgrade. Then we're going to move on to when, how, and what I'm going to upgrade. If you're going to plan for the upgrade, you need to plan in advance and understand what you want to upgrade and when you plan to do it. Then we're going to talk about what we can do in advance, how we can prepare the environment to make our upgrade as seamless as possible when the time comes. And finally, we're going to talk about solid security. A lot of you with older environments, even some of you with newer environments, one of the big things you're going to have to deal with and should be dealing with is close those security loopholes. So what I want to talk about as part of this is not just getting us ready to upgrade to version 10, but some key things we really should have done by now, which we can do as part of this upgrade. So first, I want to talk about understanding what you have and how it is being used. A lot of you are Domino admins, but a lot of you are reluctant Domino admins. You've been given the responsibility of admining the environment, and you don't know that much about it, and maybe there's servers and things out there that you really don't know. So what I want to do is take a step back and say, are we ready? Let's start with an audit. And I mean that in a good sense. This is an audit by you and for you. This is for you to identify what service you've got and who's using what. That's going to allow you to plan not just the upgrades, but the priorities of the upgrades. So the scope of your audit is one where you want to discover what servers you have, where they are, whether you can access them, which isn't that unusual a thing. I've been to plenty of sites where there are servers that no one knows how to access anymore because they've been happily running for years using IDs belonging to people that have long gone. How about certifiers? We shouldn't need this for an upgrade. There's no reason we should need this for an upgrade. But while we're at it, let's just tick that box. And do I know who's using the servers and what they're using them for? So let's talk about Domino applications. Where are they? What applications do you have? Are they being used by Notes clients? In which case, which version or web browsers? You have time right now and you should plan to test support for the latest newer Notes clients once the beta arrives. So we hope to see a beta certainly way before the product ships. If you have applications out there that are actively in use, you're going to want to be testing those applications against the new beta code. Then you don't get into this vicious cycle of, well, I'd like to upgrade, but I don't want to break this app. You can test these things and make sure that they're going to be ready when you're ready to upgrade. The other thing is, are the applications actually in use? So there are lots of tools out there that are going to be able to look across your servers and tell you what applications are being used and which ones aren't. So for example, DDM, Domino Domain Monitoring, which is a feature of Domino. It can help identify applications that aren't being used. It's a very simplistic identification, and I'll show you that. There's also activity trends, which you can enable on your server. But both those things kind of give you usage, how many people are using them, whether the database is being opened, how large they are, that kind of thing. If you want a really more detailed view of application activity and your code, there is a product from Panagen called Application Insights, which is free to you for a year if you have IBM subscription maintenance for your products. There are other products from other business partners out there if you want to search. But if you really want to understand, I've got these applications, I don't know if people are using them, I don't know anything about the code, then you may want to look at one of these tools to kind of help you get a grip on that, because these things can be roadblocks on your path to upgrade. People don't want to break one of critical applications, so they're reluctant to do the upgrade. So let's talk about access. We want to find out what servers we've got and where they are. This is a view of the server's view in a names.nsf on one of my test servers. And what we're showing here is I have a domain called Turtle, but there are two other domains here, Turtle Trav, which has my Traveler server in it, and Reef, which has another server in it. If I see another domain like this, that means there's another names.nsf on another server for me to look at. So that's a clue that you've got other servers somewhere you need to go and find. On the left-hand side, you can also see I've highlighted, there are these little icons next to Orion and Polaris. That says these are pass-through servers, and we're going to talk about that in a minute, because that's all about this server being a dependency for either users or other servers. On the right-hand side, you can see I've got all different versions here of Domino running on these servers. Standardizing on versions would be a really good starting point to make our upgrade to version 10 easier. If we're upgrading from a baseline of every server being on the same version to version 10, that's going to make everything much smoother, much easier to plan, and much more reliable. Also, check who has admin access and full admin access. On your server document, you can see here among the security tab, right at the top, I've got two fields called full access administration and administration. They are very different fields. The role of administrator can basically issue server commands, do pretty much anything on the server. Full access administrators have this elevated access, which allows them to bypass the access control lists of any database and get access to them. I would not suggest having more than a couple of people in this full access administration field. And you certainly, a lot of my customers have specific IDs for full access administration. So you have to switch to a different ID in order to get it. But make sure you know who has admin access to the servers. So if you need to do some work, you know that that person has the rights to do it, or get yourself added into the server document with the rights to do it. You need to have the server modifier role and at least editor access to names.nsf in order to change this. But don't leave it until you're ready to upgrade or planning upgrades to be looking at this. Next, I want to talk about is routing and dependencies. You need to understand if there are dependencies, which means where one server only works if another server is working. You need to understand the dependencies so you don't accidentally break them. I had a customer whose mail server in the UK stopped routing mail entirely, and that's because no one had spotted it was using a server in another country to actually look up all the routing information. When that server was shut down, everything went. So understanding dependencies is really important. Firstly, let's verify the server either allows pass-through access, which means it allows somebody, either a person or a server, to route through it to get somewhere else, or whether it allows someone to access it by routing through another server. Both those things are dependencies, but allowing pass-through access is the biggest one. If you're allowing pass-through access on your server, then it's very possible people are getting at another server by routing through this one. And if this one isn't available, neither is the other server. Also, on the front page of the server document, hidden in a collapsed section called server location information, there is this field here called mail server. There's also pass-through server, which I don't see filled in that often, but mail server is basically where the mail is delivered to, the router mailbox. The problem is what sometimes happens is people copy and paste server documents around, and then they never update this field. And so you might have a server which you haven't noticed is being set to deliver its mail via another server. So just check that field and make sure that's set correctly. And then the other thing is on mail routing. If we look at the configuration document for your server and click on the router tab on the front page on the basics page, there are two values here. One is relay host for messages leaving the local internet domain. So that is my local internet domain, as defined in my global domain document, is say turtlepartnership.com. Any email that's addressed to anything other than turtlepartnership.com will go to this relay host. So if I send an email to gmail.com, it will go to that relay host. There's also a field called local internet domain smart host, And we would use that if, for example, turtlepartnership.com mail routing was split across different platforms. And we actually want to say, okay, if you can find Gabriella on this server, deliver it to her. If you've addressed to someone I don't know, but it's still turtlepartnership.com, go ahead and send it to this smart host. So make sure you check and see if any of these fields are specified, because these are also dependencies for your mail routing. So let's briefly talk about DDM and activity trends. So we want to find out if our databases are being used, who's on the servers. So I like to open events folder.nsf. There are other ways to see this information in the admin tab under monitoring. I prefer to do it this way because I get the full screen real estate to work. DDM gives us starter probes to work with. So on the left-hand side, you can see I've given you a screenshot of the probe types. I've got my typer. On the right-hand side, we have the starter probes categorized by type. I'm highlighting database here because this is what I want for this work. So right now I'm doing an audit. So all I want to do is get some idea of what database are being used or not being used. You know, am I stressing myself out, worrying about migrating a database that people stopped using a year ago? In a future webcast, we're going to look at server health, which is obviously really important, but this is just our audit information. So under database, there is a probe called scheduled database checks or scheduled database checks. And on the right-hand side, you can see I've opened that up and I have a setting at the bottom of that probe that says monitor databases for user inactivity. So I can say generate alert if people don't access the databases on this server for, you know, a minimum 50 sessions a week. So you can control that here and start generating alerts to tell you if databases aren't being used at all. Like I said, it's fairly simplistic compared to things like application insights, but it does give you a nice, easy way of your first cut evaluating if databases are being used. Any errors are written to ddm.nsf on every server. So ddm.nsf shows not only the errors from the probes, but anything that's written to the console. So if I enable that probe, all I have to do is monitor ddm.nsf to see if it's reporting inactivity for any databases. The other thing we can do is we can do activity trends, which are more comprehensive. They're configured in the server configuration document on the activity logging tab. It will take about 24 hours once you trigger it to actually start gathering data. It tips over at midnight on the server. The activity trends database can get huge, gigs and gigs and gigs and gigs very quickly. So don't turn it on permanently and leave it on. We're turning it on in order to evaluate something. So we have two aspects for activity logging. One is the logging itself. And I may choose not to log replica events or mail events. I might choose entirely to log notes database events and maybe pass through. Those may be the only things I want to audit. And on the right-hand side, we have trends, which is going to monitor access to database during various peak times and off times. It's going to show you if things are being used and when they're going to be used. So that's an introduction to our audit, a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but I'm trying to keep these presentations at less than 15 minutes. So where are we now? At this point, you should at least have a way of finding your Domino servers, finding their dependencies and conducting a simple check on what is being used. Don't mistake a snapshot in real time for behavior over time. If you have a look at your servers, it's saying no one's using this database this week. That doesn't mean no one's using the database full stop. You have to look at this information and monitor it over certainly a few weeks before you start drawing conclusions. But obviously understanding what's being used and what you have is critical for your planning. So what's next? Next up, we're going to do Are We Ready? Looking at Traveller, Same Time, and Webmail, both iNotes and Verse on Premises. And then we're going to talk about Are We Ready? The IBM Notes Client. And both of those are going to be about finding servers, reviewing servers, and auditing access. We'll speak to you next time. Thanks very much.